Happy Valentine's Day. I have a couple of lovers in my book 1784. As it turns out, I have a brother and a sister who both find matches for themselves during the course of that book. Jack wants to get married, and he's having trouble with that due to the fact that his future father-in-law wants to move out of the state. He has to figure out how to get married before then. And Mary Jane, his sister, has her own problems, but mostly it's because she's not convinced she really wants to get married. But Jack is just about to do that, and when we start the story today, it will be Jack and his family heading toward the wedding to get married to his bride, Francie. Here we go. Jack and the girl he loved, Francie Bradshaw, have convinced their parents to allow them to marry before Mr. Bradshaw moves his family to South Carolina. Despite not having money for a marriage license, a marriage by announcement has been agreed upon. An officer of the law will witness it, and a preacher has been summoned to hear the vows. Jack's family, his parents, two sisters, and a brother, are taking Jack to the Bradshaw farm for the wedding. While Jack is eager to marry, his sister Mary Jane is undecided about marrying her boyfriend Daniel. Young Jenny is worried that if everyone leaves, she will have too much work to do, and the youngest son has his own worries about getting too close to a preacher. So here is the story of Jack and Francie's wedding in the words of 14-year-old Jenny Rose Cooper. To me, a wedding is a magic spell that takes two people from different families and makes a new one out of them. I reckon magic is worth a fuss, but this one was way more bother than the ones we had when Becky and Annie got married. Even though this one wasn't at our house, Mama put her elbows into it. Mrs. Bradshaw did most of the cooking, but Mama brought fresh baked bread, 2 jars of her best strawberry jam, and a dried apple cake to boot. She made us clean up as best we could, and if the creek hadn't been icy, I reckon she would have made us take a bath, too. Jack wore his best breeches and an old frock coat of Papa's that Mama altered to fit him. Once he shaved and dressed up in his best, he was a handsome man. But Jack took off the refitted coat and pulled on his old woolen one against the frigid air he'd face riding on the seat of Papa's wagon. Mama folded up the frock coat and held it on her lap as she huddled with the rest of us in the back, where we were out of the wind and Mama could steady the baskets holding her baked goods. The sight of that trunk holding Jack's clothes and shaving kit made it real that he wasn't coming home with us. He and Francie were to start living in the little cabin on the Bradshaw place that very night. Our family was becoming so small that soon we might not even count as a family anymore. That's why Stormy tagged along behind us while Jack spent this ride in the wagon with the rest of us. Mama, will Joe have the boys' end of the loft all to himself? He won't enjoy sleeping alone. Why would I fear to sleep alone? Joe asked. Well, I don't reckon you'll fear it, Joe, but it must be strange when you always had Jack there beside you. Don't worry, Jenny, Jack said. Papa still needs me, and I'll work by his side every day. When the new people come to the Bradshaw place, Francie and I might live at the tavern. I'll be there so often that you won't even know I'm gone. We'll miss you, Jack, Mary Jane said, but 'twill be a comfort to see you every day. Joe's not ready to step into your chores, and Jenny and I have our hands full. Children, Father said, 'tis not so grim. Francie will be a new sister. You girls may end up with more help than you expect. If Mary Jane marries Daniel, will we have a new brother then? Joe asked. I'm not ready to marry anyone, Joe, Mary replied with a sniff. Well, you better get yourself ready, Joe said. I've seen other girls looking Daniel's way. If you don't give him your word, one of them girls might beat you to it. Mary Jane's neck straightened up and she turned toward Joe. Daniel knows his own mind. If he wants somebody other than me, he's welcome to go find her. Well, where is Daniel? Joe asked. He said he'd bring you to the wedding today. He had business with Sheriff Greenlee, but he'll be at the Bradshaw's place in time. Sure enough, Daniel McCauley was in the Bradshaw yard waving to us as we arrived. They're ready inside," he said. "I brought Sheriff Sam with me to sign your papers, Jack." And he slapped my brother on the back. "You'll be an old married man before you know it." Mrs. Bradshaw went the extra mile preparing for the wedding. The aroma of fresh cooked pheasant and beef stew peppered with spices filled the air as we passed by the kitchen, and the scent of fresh greenery and dried lavender filled the main house. Beeswax candles brightened the mantel and window sills where they sat amid the dry berries and lavender. "We noticed your delicious dinner cooking," Mama said, "but I brought a few things," and she passed the cake, bread, and jam to Mrs. Bradshaw. Jack had assisted Mr. Bradshaw with pegging hats and coats. "Where's Francie?" he asked. Mr. Bradshaw chuckled. "Don't fret, my boy, she's here. Preacher Evers has been calming her nerves since he arrived." Francie, dressed in a woolen cape and hood of dove gray, entered the room on the arm of Justin Evers. Mr. Bradshaw helped the bride remove her cape, revealing a deep rose waistcoat over a linen gown dyed to the blush of apple blossoms. A few mink-brown curls fell from her cap and draped toward Francie's neck. When Becky, Adam, and baby Joshua scurried out of the winter air to join the party, we were ready to begin. Mr. Bradshaw took Francie's arm and led her to a writing desk, and there he beckoned and awestruck Jack to join them. "Children," Mr. Bradshaw began, "today we need your third public statement of your intent to marry." Joe guffawed. "We know they want to do that," he said. Father's stern look shushed him. Jack spoke up, but his deep voice had a squeak in it. "I surely want to marry Francie, and I believe she wants to marry me too." "You know I want to marry you, Jack," Francie whispered. "That was loud enough," Mr. Bradshaw declared. "I heard it. Did the rest of you hear it too?" A chorus of ayes sounded around the room. "Then we're ready to sign this paper," Mr. Bradshaw announced. "We have signatures for the 3 times they said they want to marry. Once Mr. Evers says his words, he and the sheriff will sign too, and that will be as legal as we need." "Is the dowry promise on there too?" Sheriff Sam asked. Father passed the quill to Mr. Bradshaw and said, "No, sir, that is a gentleman's agreement between Jack and Mr. Bradshaw, and they have agreed with my consent." Mr. Bradshaw nodded, and once the witnesses signed, Mr. Bradshaw stepped back, leaving Jack and Francie to face the preacher. I have to admit that Justin Evers found words in the Bible that made marriage sound agreeable. He read a flowery verse about the value of a good woman and how married people become one flesh, and then he said, "Whither thou goest, I will go," followed by a long-winded charge that we witnesses should help the young couple and remind them to value and stay true to each other. I reckon that was meant for us Coopers, seeing as how the Bradshaws were leaving the state soon. Then the preacher started in on how important marriage was to building families and raising children. After more words than I expected, Preacher Evers started the vows. Jack and Francie promised to love each other and stay faithful, and they said for the 4th time in a few weeks that they pledged to marry. The preacher asked if there was a ring, and it surprised me to see Jack pull a shiny gold band out of his pocket. Mary Jane whispered, "Mr. Bradshaw kept his first wife's gold ring. He gave it to Jack for Francie." Daniel, sitting on the other side of Mary Jane, whispered, "I'll get a ring as fine as that for you when you say yes to me, Mary Jane." My sister smiled at him. I crossed my fingers that she wouldn't say yes then and there. Lucky for me, the minister told Jack and Francie to kiss, and that drew our attention for a moment. I whispered, "I believe they may have practiced that kiss a few times." Mary Jane poked me to hush. The magic was done. Jack was married. Everyone crowded around to congratulate the new couple, and the party became a family gathering. Mrs. Bradshaw and her servant girl Bertie loaded the table with a feast to rival ours on Christmas Day, and we crowded around to share the happy moment with our new family and friends. "I never saw so much food in one place," Mama said. Joshua chose that moment to become fussy, and Becky moved to a chair by the fire where she rocked him. "'Tis a fine baby you have there, Mrs. Thompson," the preacher said. "I thank you, sir," Becky replied. "We had his baptism only a few weeks ago, and he fussed through that as well." Preacher Evers nodded. You know we Baptists don't believe in baptizing babies. 'Tis better to wait till they're old enough to know what they're committing to," he said. Becky kept rocking, but her brow furrowed as she turned toward Father. Adam placed his steady hands on the back of the rocker. "'Twas more a promise from the congregation to help teach him right. That's how I understand it." Preacher Evers smiled and said, "I hope to be around on the day he promises to commit to God. Perhaps he'll ask to be baptized again." "You mean once ain't enough?" Joe asked. "Once is fine," Papa replied. "Now eat your cake quietly." Mama changed the subject with a question for Mr. Bradshaw. "I hear you have a cabin ready for Jack and Francie. May we see it later?" she asked. "That cabin belongs to the children now," he said, "but they'll want to show it to you." "Indeed we will, Mrs. Mother Cooper," Francie replied with a giggle as she remembered her new relationship. After we ate, Father took his fiddle from the wagon and set us children to dancing. "My word, I haven't seen the Virginia reel since we left the old state. Capital idea, Mr. Cooper." Joel Bradshaw danced with Mother, and Jack showed the steps to Francie, while Mr. Bradshaw took a turn with his wife. Justin Evers declined to dance, but he tapped his toes and clapped to the music. The room wasn't large enough for a full reel, but we had a fine time nonetheless. Joe was my first partner, but he stepped on my toes one too many times. When I hollered out in pain, Mary Jane and Daniel split apart, and each of them took one of us by the hand. I was right proud to dance with handsome Daniel, but Mary Jane didn't fare as well. Joe spun her out too hard, and she tumbled against Preacher Evers. Preacher wasn't angry, though. He laughed as he set my sister upright again and watched Mary Jane dance back to the rug in front of the fire. I'm not sure if all Baptists are as particular as Mr. Evers, but he did not dance, and he didn't drink spirits when Mr. Bradshaw offered him whiskey. He spread laughter through the room, though, and I reckon that's enough. The preacher chatted with Becky by the fire, and he even bounced little Joshua on his knee when it was Becky's turn to reel with Adam. I joined him by the hearth and asked, "Where's your wife, Mr. Evers?" "I've not married, Miss Cooper." "Do you have one in mind, then?" I asked. He stopped bouncing the baby, but only for a moment. With a hint of a smile, he said, "For now. My work is my life, and the people I serve are my family. 'Tis not the right time for a wife." He looked around the bright room and studied the happy bride and groom. Without missing a bounce, he added, "I fear that for me the time will never be right." In midwinter, the days are short, and so was our celebration. We peeked into Jack's new home before we loaded back into the wagon. 'Twas a small place, fit for 2 people. The walls were thick and well chinked, and fire embers were glowing. Jack and Papa stoked them up into a proper fire. "You'll be plenty warm in here, Jack," Joe said, "and Mama sent victuals for you in case Francie can't cook yet." "Oh, I'll do fine with that. I'll keep Jack fit and happy," Francie said, and she moved closer to her new husband and looped her arm into his. Mama hugged her first daughter-in-law. "We're glad to have you as part of our family, Francie. We're just over the way if you ever need us." Then she stood in front of Jack, one hand on each of his shoulders. For a moment she fought back her tears, and then she kissed Jack on the cheek. Her voice cracked as she said, "See you soon, son." Papa motioned us toward the door, and then he had the final word with my older brother. "Be a good husband, Jack," he said. "A good family grows people that make the world better." And then he clapped Jack on the shoulder and ushered us to the wagon. And that was the wedding in Burke County in 1784. Find out more in 1784, The Birth of Morgan Towne, and you can find it at cooperspeak.com. Happy Valentine's Day!